Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Technology is an ally of electoral integrity when we put it into a context of institutionalization. Leandro, querido, of electoral transparency, if you decide to do things that you know will work, you will leave a lot of opportunities on the table. Jeff Bezos, who is the Amazon founder. Good day to all of you who are with us in this opening ceremony for e-voting possibilities and challenges for its instrumentation in Mexico. Especially, I want to say thank you to our President Councilor Lorenzo Cordova and also the President of the Higher Court of the Federation, Mr. Reyes Rodriguez. The use of technology is vital for all activities that we carry out on a daily basis. We can also say that many of activities that we do today have to do with the use of some kind of technology. With no doubt, this has made our task easier, reducing times, cost, and efforts to carry out activities that before were harder without technology. For example, bank transfers. These are activities that we have all done, but before you had to go to the bank, line up, be there in person, deposit your money, and now just with a few clicks, we can transfer money at any time to any place. Now we depend on technology. So why should elections be left out? For more than 30 years, we have been voting in the same way. So this means that as a result, we have a complex organization of elections, and it takes a lot of time and resources, material and human resources, to be able to organize the elections. According to Robert Creamer, who is from the University of Estonia, talked about electoral transparency on August 6th, and he said that e-voting costs half that to other ways of doing it. It's a tenth of the cost of elections in regular polling stations. To share some information, to be able to print electoral ballots, we needed to have more than 4,400 hours, more than 183 days to be able to have all the printed ballots packed. And we needed more than 580 tons of paper brought from Chihuahua to produce the ballots. For example, in Estonia, they also saved many days of work, and the e-voting of 2005, or in Brazil, for example, e-voting since 2000. The work of the citizens that are volunteers in this work is very long and tiring, and then we have to wait 3 days to receive the results. And this can be reduced with the use of technology. We have had progress in some areas within elections. I think that this institute can go beyond in its scope so that this can be much more efficient, but especially less burdensome for all Mexicans. With no doubt, one of the main elements of the electoral process is the way in which citizens express their willingness, meaning the way they vote. Through technologies that are reliable, we can do this remotely, or through devices that would make it much easier to count the votes, and that way we would be much more efficient. The use of e-voting on internet has been used by Mexicans abroad for more than a decade now, and this is the preferred modality over sending in their vote. 60% of the Mexicans decided to do this in the federal elections of 2021, as well as those in 2022. So why shouldn't we do this for all the Mexicans that are also in Mexico? A clear example that favors citizen participation is that of India. It has one of the largest electoral list. We're talking about the fact that they have more than 4 times the number of voters in the US and in Mexico. In Mexico, this percentage of our electoral list has to do with 6 countries altogether, and our electoral processes cost double. Or for example, in the States, they cost double compared to India. In India, participation is very important because they have like a participation of 66% approximately, and they use e-voting as their way of voting. So because of all these factors, the Commission of Electoral Organization of INE, that I am the chair of, is organizing this forum. We want to become more familiar with the use of technology in electoral processes so that we can all learn about other experiences that have taken place in other parts of the world. And that way we can eliminate taboos regarding these tools so that we can have certainty in its reliability. Throughout these 3 days, throughout different tables, we are going to have international experts that will share their perspective on e-voting and the use of other technologies in elections, as well as the experience that they have had in their country. And they will be sharing the issues, the kindness, and challenges that e-voting has regarding security, transparency, audibility, among others. We are also going to have the president of chairs of bodies that have been pioneers in the instrumentation of these tools and that they have more experience, 17 years of experience of the use of these technologies. In some cases, they even have local regulations. We are also going to have the presence of the electoral authority that has also ruled on e-voting. Finally, we will have the representation of the legislature through the board of INE. They will share the advantages and disadvantages of instrumenting e-voting because they are the ones who exert their activities and they are the ones who will be able to modify the legislation to be able to instrument e-voting in Mexico, and that the initiatives match up in going forward in the use of e-voting. As we can observe, we are going to have a very complete program that will allow us as electoral authorities, as well as all the stakeholders, to be able to have an ample compared perspective of the instrumentation and implementation of e-voting in Mexico. I want to say thank you to each and every one of the speakers and participants in this forum. And those following us on streaming, thank you. Technology can be an ally so that we can continue guaranteeing human rights in the political arena and in elections for all the Mexicans, even if they are living abroad. Thank you all so much and welcome to this forum. Thank you very much, Counselor. We now give the floor to our Justice of the Federal Judicial Branch Electoral Court, Mr. Reyes Rodriguez. Thank you very much, Mr. Lorenzo Cordova and Carla Humphrey, for inviting me to this opening ceremony. The context in which this activity is going to take place has to do with democracies that are going through a very particular issue, fired by the lack of efficacy in politics, social debts, and the lack of confidence in authorities that represent them. Mexico is part of this trend. According to the Latino Barometro of 2021, only 33% of Mexicans are satisfied with democracy. 57% say that it's a non-democratic country. In this context, IT has become a tool so that citizens can be closer to their institutions and to be able to identify the benefits offered. For example, we have mechanisms that have been developed to facilitate the activities in various stages of the electoral process. Among these, the implementation of e-voting, which is an area in which progress has been made and a debate is presented in our country. We recognize various benefits of this tool. For example, higher efficiency in issuing and counting votes, the higher participation because it's more accessible to be able to vote, as well as an increase in confidence because it's more automated. In this way, in the great majority of the cases of e-voting, we have seen positive effects of generating better credibility in electoral systems, because with the reduction of human intervention in elections, there are fewer possibilities of manipulation and errors. That's how it's perceived. E-voting can be instrumented in person or offer both options. And for this to be effective, we have to meet minimum requirements according to the positions of the H project. These are to maintain the right of each citizen to be able to vote secretly, to guarantee the access to all voters, and to increase transparency regarding the way the system works. So these are the conditions that have prevailed in the work of INE, in the implementation of e-voting, and for the votes of Mexicans abroad. And also other activities like, for example, Jalisco, Coahuila, Mexico City, and Hidalgo. These cases have allowed the electoral authorities to identify the challenges and overcome them. In the jurisdictional arena, we had elections in Tuxtla, Jalisco in 2009. There we analyzed the constitutionality of this activity, as well as the consequences of unforeseen factors like what happened when there was a complete shutdown. In Mexico City, the court also analyzed if the guidelines of voting were being vulnerated. And we were able to reiterate that political parties should participate in these processes of implementation of tools. On the other hand, in an electoral process of El Marqués Querétaro, the administrative authority studied who should have the responsibility of managing the process, because the results were inverted when yes, supposedly it won and it was truly a no. This is very relevant to be much more effective in this mechanism. We need to have an e-voting system that is more successful when voters have confidence in the electoral system and in their administrative authority in charge of implementing it. This confidence is directly linked to electoral authorities, but to a great extent, it depends on political stakeholders who do not agree with the results, don't consider that this is a target of attack. It doesn't matter how good the technology is, it will not increase citizen participation if they are questioning the system of elections in all of this aspect. In summary, e-voting requires electoral processes that are reliable in a technical and operative context that is completely precise and effective, and a political system that is positive. With the numbers, we can see that we have done a lot of work regarding citizen perception of the INE in the recent electoral processes. For example, in El Financiero, we were able to see that more than half of the Mexicans have confidence in INE. Also, the administration of e-voting, like for example, of the e-polling station, have shown a confidence of 67%. In Coahuila, it went up to 77%. However, we forget about the relevance of a political context that is positive in the instrumentation of these tools and electoral technologies. All of us have a responsibility to be able to accomplish this condition. The quality in our democracy depends on these institutions and on electoral institutions, on political parties, and in academia. We have to work in favor of democracy. That's why I celebrate this forum, so we can collaborate and listen to a diversity of perspectives and be able to reflect on this new topic. And this will be done through our tables of discussion. Congratulations. Thank you very much, Justice. Now we are going to listen to our President Councilor, Lorenzo Cordova. When he concludes his participation, we ask him to officially open this forum. Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be able to participate here in this reflection on a topic that is part of our country. And in these days, surely you will see a more enriched conversation. When we talk about a modernization for elections, we see that it has been a permanent objective of the INE. And in this task, we have to say we have had the backup with many decisions of the Federal Judicial Branch Electoral Court, and I kindly greet our justice. Since it was created in INE, we have promoted projects for the modernization in the way electoral processes are organized. Each step that we have taken allow us to incorporate technologies and IT systems without losing sight of, and I think this is a very important point when we talk about e-voting in our country, without losing any of the certainty, legality, and transparency that characterizes the electoral processes in our country and in other countries. Just like Carla was saying about certainty being fundamental for the electoral integrity. I want to share some examples of how technology and the development of our electoral system has been part of this. On one hand, we can show off or highlight that the procedures that have been used to clean up the electoral roll, as well as locks and measures for the voting ID and protecting biometric data of all our Mexicans that are part of the list. And these are renewed and strengthened periodically with technological advances. Also, in electoral processes, we have improved technological measures of security of the 20 systems that we have in the electoral processes. All of these are IT systems to be able to protect them against attacks and to make sure that consultations are done quickly and that they are more user-friendly. The same thing happens with the oversight system, with the information system of the electoral processes, as well as the other IT systems for the follow-up of the electoral processes. And also, we have a mechanism that goes beyond elections, but that it talks about the vocation of the electoral institutionalization, which are the various IT mechanisms that have been instrumented with other parts of Mexico to avoid identity theft and to authenticate these people through services of public institutions or financial services given to citizens on a daily basis. When we talk about going to modernization, it's guided the decisions of INE on e-voting. When we talk about e-voting, just like Carla Humphrey said, and our Justice Reyes Rodriguez, in regards to e-voting, this electoral authority in the past has had various forums and seminars like this one to have further awareness among political parties and citizens regarding the tools that can be used to vote in an electronic format. The board has also made decisions to allow Mexicans abroad to do e-voting. And the idea is that we can do this inside of Mexico and abroad. E-voting is available to Mexicans abroad already. And with no doubt, we have had positive results and we must assess this. And I think that this backs up the road of going towards automation of votes for Mexicans. I want to share some of the background regarding what we have done. In 2009, it was known as IFE, created a temporary commission regarding the viability of e-voting. And then in 2012, they used the e-ballot as an experimental program in elections. And then in 2015, INE now approved a pilot program in 3 electoral districts. And also, if we talk about a comparison of e-voting. Up to now, we have had one international conference and this forum that talk about e-voting. We have also had workshops and courses to understand what the world is doing regarding e-voting and to get feedback, just like our Councillor Humphrey was talking about with India, Brazil, Estonia, where in these countries, e-voting is not only going forward faster compared to us, but that we see that in the case of, for example, in Brazil, we see that there is certainty and governance. So I think that these examples can be used as a way to reflect on the fact that we can go forward in the use of technologies in voting without losing at all, to the contrary, winning certainty and transparency that is so necessary for electoral processes. In 2020, INE approved the first binding activity in Coahuila and Hidalgo. It's not the first e-voting process that is binding, but these are the first ones done federally. So we have had a lot of progress locally, and this is a source where we have been able to abbreviate good practices and experiences and been able to push e-voting. In 2020, in INE, we had the first binding electoral process in Hidalgo. And then in 2021, we repeated this activity. And finally, in the elections of June of this last year, we also did it in Aguascalientes and Tamaulipas, I'm sorry, in 2022. So e-voting is going forward in certainty and transparency. Gradually, yes, and also others slower, but with certainty and transparency. In Mexico, e-voting is not a speculation. It's a discussion of a reality that should be debated and that I think we must continue working forward with certainty, legality, and transparency, and following the necessary steps. This is the formula that we have used in INE to modernize our instruments, but guaranteeing competence and legality and transparency. So this forum of e-voting is very important because we have to remember that the procedures that sometimes are a little old have been because of a lack of confidence of the society and political actors regarding their institutions. It's a lack of confidence that we have been working on in INE with legality and transparency. Even though we haven't had any electoral processes without innovations, INE is still the civil institution that has the highest levels of confidence in Mexico. And we have built this confidence based on certainty, legality, and certainty that comes from the electoral processes. Just like Mr. Reyes mentioned, that's why I conclude that I am very grateful and happy that our Councillor Comfra Humphrey is continuing with the work of INE to be able to instrument e-voting in Mexico. I'm also grateful that our Councillor Humphrey has taken on the role of this work, and that I am convinced that e-voting will continue going forward in the coming years in a process that with no doubt has been gradual but consistent and uninterrupted. So thank you very much and congratulations for the organization this forum. And if you will allow me, I want to follow the protocol of opening this ceremony. It's amazing to be here with my colleagues of Mexico and the world. I admire you all, and I am very happy to be with you. So I now want to officially open this forum on e-voting in Mexico. We are going to be talking about possibilities and challenges of its instrumentation in Mexico. Thank you very much, and I wish you the best of success in this work. Thank you very much, President Counselor. Thank you to all our participants. Thank you to all of you listening to us on our YouTube channel. We are now going to have a 10-minute break before we continue with this forum on e-voting possibilities and challenges for its instrumentation in Mexico. Thank you very much.
Muy buenos días, gracias por seguir.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you for staying here in this live stream. Right now, we'll start the panel number one of this forum, evolving and its different modalities, for which we have the participation as moderator of electoral counselor and president of the Commission of Electoral Organization, Councillor Carla Humphrey. You have the floor, Councillor. Thank you. Good morning to everyone joining us on the different INE platforms where we're broadcasting or streaming this event. Thanks, of course, to our participants.
Joining us for this forum. Your participation is absolutely important for us. Daremos inicio a la primera sesión de este evento.
Let's start the first different modalities for its application. The aim of this session is to have an overview of modalities of e-voting, their implementation, and the different aspects to consider for their application in Mexico. To this end, we'll have experts, international and national experts who will honor us with their experiences. They will share their opinions and comments regarding these topics. I believe that it's important to start with this topic because we're trying to offer those joining us or sharing with them the general traits and characteristics of e-voting so that we can become more familiar and get knowledge around this voting tool so that we can also have access to experiences all in other places of the world. It's important for citizens to understand everything that e-voting entails so that we can dispel doubts and gain more knowledge about this topic so that we can have more clarity regarding the possibilities and challenges of its implementation. It is precisely through the use of these forums and tools like that we can gain more understanding or a better understanding of these mechanisms that I'm convinced that will help improve electoral functions like those of INE. These electoral experiences in India, Brazil, and several places in Latin America, Germany, with a sentence from the Constitutional Tribunal, which posed a specific form or modality of e-voting are enriching, especially now that we're in the current debate around electoral reforms where we can have an eventual or a possible reform so that we can make progress when it comes to e-voting. But who could be better than these experts in the field who talk about this topic? But before that, I want to remind you that the short bios of those joining us today, as well as those in future sessions, and all the information on this event that will be available on the microsite of this forum, which is available online on our webpage or directly at the site www.ine/forum/electronic voting. I would like to introduce the following guests, but not after, not before thanking you for your presentations and participation. We have Ninfa Fernandez Trejos, an academic of the National Autonomous University, who has a PhD in political and social science, and she's a candidate researcher for the National Research Systems. Her research lines include innovative participation, citizens' participation, and e-voting, among others. Thank you for joining us, Doctor. We also have Dr. Jose Thompson, Executive Director of the Inter-American Institute of Human Rights. He is an attorney from the University of Costa Rica with a major in electoral law in Perugia, Italy, and he's the author of different papers and articles on comparative electoral law. Thank you for your presence, Dr. Thompson. And then we have Mr. Giuseppe Divino, electoral advisor in digital elections. He was the coordinator of Brazil for 15 years. He worked for the Electoral High Court of Brazil. He has an MBA in Technology of Information from PWA known in Brasilia, and he's the author of a book, O Quinto Ninja, which where he shares his experience in electoral justice in Brazil. Thank you, Mr. Dutra, excuse me, for joining us and accepting the invitation. I'll start by giving the floor for 20 minutes to Mr. Giuseppe Dutra. Please, Mr. Dutra, go ahead, please. Good morning to everyone. Good morning to everyone. I apologize for speaking in Portuñol, a little Portuguese and a little Spanish, and with the objective of sharing the Brazilian experience in the case or in the area of digital elections. Let me share my screen. Can you see my presentation? Is it okay? My presentation to begin with should start by thanking you, INE, for the invitation to participate in this important event. The challenge for me is make good use of our time so that I can be on time. I'll talk about the e-voting machine in Brazil, 25 years of technology in favor of democracy. I'll speak a little about the evolution of the electoral process in Brazil and the benefits of technological innovation, as well as electoral processes and technology, as well as security and transparency. 30 years ago, we had a process, an electoral process that was conventional in nature, where people voted using ballots. These ballots that were folded and inserted into ballot boxes and duffel bags. And then later or after that, they were counted on a table known as vote counting table to verify, interpret, and complete the results of voting. And then you had lists and maps that were completed with information that was later consolidated and results were shared. There was a lot of human intervention, and wherever you have a human intervention or participation, you will have three characteristics that are atypical of human beings: slow action, intentional failures, and non-intentional failures. That means that there was a lot of distrust in the Brazilian voting process because there was a fraud everywhere. And to complete or compile the results, the process could take weeks. And there was a lot of suspicion cast on the process. The solution was precisely an effort to mitigate the intervention of humans in the process through the use of technology. And we began using digital voting lists or ballots, including, for example, modalities such as voting ballot boxes or machines that have been used in Brazil for 26 years. I'm talking about the TDRE system, which is an electronic recording device without a ballot printed. And then we have another system which has an electronic ballot box with the printing of ballots, online voting on the internet, online voting in controlled environments, as well as end-to-end verification voting systems. These are the different types of voting available today and used all over the planet. Now let's talk about the evolution of the electoral process in Brazil. This process began in 1986 with the electronic registration of approximately 70 million voters. And that was the first electoral roll with a computerized roll in the country. In 1994, we began the data processing evolution of the total number of votes. In 1996, we introduced the first e-voting machine in municipal elections in Brazil. Throughout this time, we almost one-third of polling stations in Brazil have already had electronic votings. And from there, we expanded the electronic voting system with 100% of coverage with software and equipment. And then we made several changes in subsequent years, including the so-called digital signature process for electronic voting machines in order to protect and shield voting softwares and agilize the release of results on the internet. And we began working with also printed ballots that turned out to be inefficient. And then in 2004, we implemented the digital voting registration process. We're talking about digital table that stores votings as they are entered by voters, and they are randomly recorded and stored so that there is no interference from humans. In 2008, we introduced uh, an open code operating system, specifically Linux in all e-voting machines to improve transparency. We also implemented the biometric identification processes for voters, which is an important attribute to ensure the authenticity and the identification of voters, eliminating the possibility of one person voting instead of another. In 2009, we began working on the chain of trust with e-voting machines, which increased the level of trust and security of e-voting machines. At the same time, we introduced security hardware that is verified from the standpoint of its authenticity as soon as it's installed in the e-voting system to ensure or to guarantee the authenticity of the process. In 2009, we also introduced a system for public voting security tests for the verification and tests to prevent hacking with security systems and devices to prevent the hacking of the barriers that are used with the voting system. In 2017, we introduced a new design of the voting machines, which will be used in the upcoming 20 process. And we have several evolutions, such as a series of virtual services for voters. In addition to a 100% digital accountability process, a web application or app that allows voters to justify their voting if they're not close or at electoral address, and a process that allows the Brazilians anywhere in the world to justify their vote. And we have a totalization process centralized on the cloud with control from the higher electoral court that has allowed us to implement a series of protection services. The benefits for the users are agility, security, and among others. And then we have also other benefits, such as the ease of interaction, intuitive keyboards, voting with numbers, and accessibility, including a follow-up process that allows Brazilians to um, vote, including sectors such as those of indigenous people, older people, illiterate people, because the system is highly intuitive. Voting machines are highly intuitive. People don't even have to read. You vote with numbers, and you have a confirmation process. If I enter the wrong number and that number doesn't correspond to the photo on the voter ID, you can correct the process by pressing the orange button. So we have a series of processes that are increasing the level of access of voters in Brazil. People such as indigenous persons can now vote in a country where we have 8,500,000 square kilometers, 50% of regions, 50% of which is in the Amazon region, which includes lots of locations difficult to reach. voting machines. E-voting machines make it all the way to these locations so that these Brazilian citizens, excuse me, can participate in the electoral process. Let's talk about the electoral process and technology. The electoral process has evolved as technology has evolved. I mean, when we made the decision to introduce uh, this e-voting electoral system, you can equate that to fast speed trains that have evolved in the past. The electoral process in Brazil includes a series of processes. The first one is that the voters can go to any of the more than 450,000 locations where they have voting machines. And these polling stations open from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. At the end of the voting day, through a digital code, an employee will close the voting process. And and which allows the system to create a voting list, an electronic voting list. And next, the e-voting machine will create or generate the printout of the voting in that machine, which is important because the results are made publicly available in that very moment, which means that all the different representatives of the different political parties present in the polling station can have access to this information even before the electoral authority receives and consolidates this information. One of these copy is put up on a wall at the polling station with a QR code that allows Brazilians or Brazilian citizens to confirm the results. And results can also be gathered digitally. And that means also that people can know the results in their district or polling stations before the electoral authority. And after that, the results are recorded in digital media, highly encrypted. And then they are subject to a process of electronic signing. And then these media are taken to a transmission point, which is a system only available to the electoral authority. Um, but that also means that the e-voting machines are not connected to any system or any online or electronic systems. You need to use a standalone medium which is taken to a transmission point that is connected to an encrypted and highly protected system or network where data are transmitted to a data center to consolidate the results. And then you have employees that confirm the results. They have to follow actually a checklist to confirm the integrity of the results. And this individual is the only one with the code to decrypt the information. Once the data are decrypted, that data is shared over the internet to confirm if these results at the polling station coincide with the original machine, which allows the Brazilian system to verify and confirm information against the actual voting in the polling station, which is compared to the total number of votes. Then all this data is subjected to a totalization process, and then the data goes through a process uh, that allows us to count all the votes no matter where they came from, including people voting overseas. Security and transparency. Um, we invest a lot in security and transparency through the use of technological systems and approaches. This figure shows all the different aspects of relevance to the Brazilian electoral system and our digital paradigm. All these functions or functionalities are possible including security aspects, auditing of souls, which leads us to a new voting digital paradigm, which has more auditing and security mechanisms compared to manual processes. At the center of these functionalities and the process, thanks to this digital paradigm, is the so-called seal or sealing system, which involves digital signatures with the software developed by the technical team of the electoral system in our institute in Brazil. With a lot of work done prior to elections so that even political parties can confirm all the information, including the codes or the code of the system. Uh, all these systems are aimed at shielding or protecting the software with mathematical processes to guarantee the integrity of all these programs. It's a shielding process. A copy of the software developed for a specific license is taken to a vault for protection, and then an additional copy is kept outside of that electronic vault, so that we can proceed with the implementation or deployment of the software. And then we have a public meeting with the participation of public prosecutors, political parties, and electoral authorities to do or engage in a matching process to confirm that the software was not tampered with. Because a single comma in the code of a software program will lead to problems. And then we start a process that involves to begin with to verify any changes to the software and to make sure that the system or the software can be loaded in e-voting machines. We have a chain of trust based on hardware with the use of computers that are part of electronic voting machines with digital codes or keys. The first element involved is the security hardware, which verifies a sequence of events to make sure that e-signatures are introduced or entered all throughout the process to make sure that the software loaded in e-voting machines is the right one. And eliminating any possibility of tampering in this equipment. Biometric authentication. Well, this is another form of use of technology in electronic processes. Based on the concept that there are no two similar fingerprints worldwide. Upon voting, the fingerprints are compared against our original records to prevent one person voting instead of another during voting day. All biometric data are stored in a data bank with the control of the so-called ABIS software or system, which is an automated biometric identification system that compares biological biometric data to ensure that all the systems, excuse me, that all the data is individual. And the day before voting day, we have a lottery or a draw in the Electoral Institute in Brazil to test the integrity of the voting process with the participation of citizens. At these sessions and places, there are cameras installed so that tests can be conducted, thorough tests are conducted to test the integrity of the voting process. And through the use of different systems so that we can confirm the integrity of a process. And this process allows us to audit the results of voting machines. This process takes place in all the different states. This process started in 2002, and so far we have not had any mismatch between um, the data entered in voting machines and the data in our systems. Let's talk about the digital voting registry. We have a system that involves a table that allows us to audit the voting and vote counting, um, which ensures integrity and the authenticity of the process, which allows political parties to oversee or audit all the voting data, which is an excellent auditing and transparency and mechanism. The records in the voting machine end up in a black box like that used in airplanes. We actually have a system that records everything that happens with the e-voting machine, which is also subject to an electronic signing process in an effort to audit and verify everything that happened with the e-voting machine. The Brazilian e-voting machine system has more than 30 security features, which means that trying to tamper with the results or hack the system is very difficult. And these barriers are tested for security, and any Brazilian citizen, including hackers, can participate with hacking plans to try to breach the security of the voting system. And all this process is recorded and tracked to reinforce security features. And if a hacker or a citizen can overcome or break out these security features, then it is recorded and things are improved. And we have a series of test events which is made by law. And this process is open to all the citizens prior to elections. Let's talk about the impossibility of committing fraud. I mean, all throughout this process and all throughout this time, ever since the voting process in this modality was implemented, we haven't had any frauds. And all throughout its history, the voting system, the electronic voting system hasn't been hacked, or there haven't been any frauds from the standpoint of e-voting systems. Even in remote locations, including those in Amazon region. I mean, e-voting machines are taken all the way to places where there's not even any electricity, and still the e-voting machine will work because they have batteries so that the citizens all throughout the country can have access to voting and this technology. Well, I wrote a book entitled O Quinto Ninja, the Fifth Ninja, that shares this 25-year story in the process of evolution of e-voting systems in Brazil. And I have also participated in the development of Brazilian e-voting machines. I apologize for taking a little more time.
Muchas gracias, Maestro Dutra.
Thank you, Mr. Dutra, for your explanation. It was interesting to see how all throughout these years you have perfected the digital elections system in Brazil. Biometric systems are very interesting. And opening the code of software 1 year before elections so that everybody can have access to them and verify their integrity. is important and audited and supervised results are also important to confirm the integrity of voting. If that's okay with you, please share your presentation with us. And of course, we will be interested in sharing information on the book. And next we have Dr. Thompson. For you have 20 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be able to participate in this forum. And just like many activities that are promoted by INE, which are quite relevant. And it's very useful to be able to learn from various experiences before going forward into a path of use of technology. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen. Let's hope it's hassle-free. I have sent you my presentation, so if I can't share it, I would ask you to share it, but I think I am able to share it. Can you see my screen okay? So I want to share with you this information. I have been studying and witnessing the use of various technologies in elections. And the truth is that it's impossible to imagine stages of electoral processes without the automation, that was the first stage, and without the use of information, that is a second stage. With no doubt, artificial intelligence will also be offering us new possibilities, especially in pre-electoral stages and post-electoral stages. Can you imagine having electoral list without automation and without all the technology that we use? Or think about showing electoral results without the use of technology that allows us to automate and offer the electoral results in very short periods. So if this is the case, let's see the before and after elections. Why are there some people that are hesitant, and even groups in various countries that have gotten organized against e-voting? So we are going to be able to see some of their positions. And of course, we are going to make a review of Latin America. I am not going to include all experiences, even though these images that you are seeing on this slide are images of the e-ballot in the Netherlands. It's like the background of e-ballots. I love to begin to refer to the Netherlands because the truth is that the reason why they decided to go towards e-voting is because the Dutch electoral system is really complex. And there are many lists, many political parties with many lists. So look at the first image. You can see how difficult it is to organize it on paper. That's why in the second image, you can see how they're trying to have like a mechanical polling station, and it's through like a lever where the voter chooses his or her preference. And then we see the last image, which is the e-polling station that was used some years in the past. And then they went through a debate and they are no longer using the e-polling station. And there's a whole story behind this, but I'm not going to focus on that today. But we have different realities, and we have been able to go towards the use of some kind of e-voting. And here I'm going to be talking about different modalities because there isn't just one electronic polling station, and it's not just one possibility for e-voting. So what are we referring to? For example, I love this classification because it allows us to distinguish between not only technologies, because I insist in each place that I have had to talk about this topic, every time we choose some kind of modality of e-voting, we are changing the electoral system. It's just like our colleague from Brazil said, it's not just to have a machine and people use this machine to vote. There is so much to do before and after this so that it can work. So previously, we have to work on awareness and education regarding what e-voting means. And then you have to continue offering certainty and verifiability to the citizens. So we have different categories. The first category we have is automated reading of votes on paper. These are just optical readers. And you can see it in the first image on the top to the right. And optical readers, we thought were going to be discarded technologies, that they would be no longer used. Do you remember when we used to use them in education systems? For example, I had to take a driving test and I had to like fill in little circles, and then these were put through an optical reader, and that way you would get your results. But it turns out that optical readers are coming back to life again. Right now, they are the most used technology in the US. After the large discussion of the year 2000 regarding the elections in Florida, and there was a discussion if Bush Jr. had won or not that state, because it was determining who won the elections for president. After that, regulations were presented, and among the preferred devices used are these optical readers. For example, Puerto Rico votes on paper, and then the counting is done with these readers. So as we can see, traditional voting doesn't change. It's still on paper. And you don't have to do a lot of awareness work among the citizens. And that way you can count the results quite quickly, thanks to the speed of these readers. Then we have autonomous e-voting. And here we can see that in Latin America, they have used 3 different modalities. Some have used an adapted like keyboard. They use like a conventional computer, and then there's a keyboard that only has a certain amount of keys enabled. And these have been used in pilot programs only because there are always implications of what do you do with these computers when we're not using them for elections. And then secondly, we have a machine that has like push buttons, so you can make your selection. In Brazil, they have been using this type of technology. And then finally, we have machines that have a touch screen. So the reader presses his or her options based on what appears on the screen. And of course, all of these have variations if they print a document that allows you to compare the votes. So That way the voter can have something that's print out to confirm that his or her choice on the touch screen was the right thing. And then that way they can match up with the paper printed out with what's on the computer. This has been used widely, and we will be seeing which countries are using it. And then finally, we have another e-voting system that people think is the e-polling station, which is on internet. And this is the dream of many people, that we would be able to do electronic voting on internet. That way we wouldn't have to be investing in voting centers, that we could do it while we're at the beach, in our pajama from home, that we can do it whenever we want to. And it would make it so much easier to vote. And it would make it much more affordable. For example, if you had 100% internet voting, the truth is that the voting centers that we have today would completely disappear. Of course, this is the dream to come to this point. But the problem here is that a lot of work that has been done in the US, and they are gathered in a book that's called Broken Ballots. And it's like horror stories of what can happen if your equipment breaks down. And what's true is that internet voting is the most vulnerable modality of all the ones known. This has been documented in a series of happenings, and some are even funny. For example, in Washington, D.C., they ran a pilot program before they set up internet voting. And I think you know about this story. In the US, many universities were able to hack the system. They changed the names of the candidates. They switched the colors of the political parties. And of course, after that, Washington, D.C. discarded internet voting completely. And internationally speaking, here in Latin America, there have been pilot programs for internet voting. I will share two cases. And internationally speaking, we have seen Estonia and Belgium as the countries that have had more internet voting, and it has been more reliable. So the position that I want to share with you is that the electronic voting systems are explained and should be there to resolve issues, lackings of electoral systems, as well as their social, political, and cultural environments. So what am I trying to say with this? We don't want to use technology just to use technology. We want to resolve a problem that's not working in the electoral system. And to resolve this system, we should use this technology to vote, whatever technology we choose. It can be the first one, the second one, the third one. So here we can see that in Latin America, we don't have the only cases. Right now, I'm going to share one that I do not have on this list. Brazil was already presented by Giuseppe, but as we know, Brazil is using electronic voting with systems developed in Brazil. Venezuela votes 100% with a ballot that I will share with you. That is a technology that's Italian and that has been adapted by Latin America. Paraguay is a very interesting story. Paraguay voted with 50% of their citizens with the Brazilian ballots. Then they discarded e-voting. And last year, they came back to e-voting using a different technology. I think that Paraguay is a country we can learn a lot from. Because first of all, they used one type of technology. Why did they use it? Why did they eliminate? And what does their new technology offer that they set up this last year? Peru. Peru has had many pilot programs. Some districts in Peru have voted electronically. But when we talk about the case of Peru, there is one difficulty, which is that this prototype, this type of machine has been modified 3 times now. And the first machine that they used has nothing to do with the second machine. So we can see that each administration of AMPOC, which is their National Electoral Office, has had their own prototype. So they have not been able to evolve and have an historical perspective. The state of Mexico, as you heard from Lorenzo, and in Mexico, there have been pilot programs. I participated in one in Mexico City. And it was really, really interesting to be able to be there. And we have had technological developments from Mexico. We're talking about cases of Coahuila and Jalisco. In the case of Jalisco, they even call it their electronic little suitcase because it allows them to be taken from one place to another. They can pack it up and take it somewhere else. Provinces of Argentina. In Argentina, there is not one like unique vote nationally, and they have a very particular voting system. What they do is that they, for example, take the ballot and they put it in an envelope. So those that have the guarantee are the envelopes. It doesn't matter if it's a photocopy, if it's stained with coffee or whatever. So they have tried to eliminate this and go towards e-voting, and they have not been able to do it because of political issues. However, there are provinces in Argentina. I think the one we know about is the one of Salta. They developed their own technology. They have shared it internationally, and it has had a great influence in the elections of Paraguay this last year. And with internet voting, we have had pilot programs with more controlled populations like Panama and Mexico. They have used it for nationals abroad. And as you know, this is only a sample of the population because generally speaking, few Mexicans abroad are voting. And the tests have been considered successful, but the political party does not think that this is such a great idea for all of Mexico. They're like, okay with it with the Mexicans abroad only. Here we can see the machine from Brazil. But I would like to say 2 things about this. Something that Giuseppe also presented much better than me, which is how gradual or progressive it is in its introduction. If I am not mistaken, Giuseppe, the first one was in Santa Catarina, and then progressively it was used in 100% of votes in Brazil. And I want to talk about the issues that have had with the Mexican, with the country, because since they're not printing up anything, they think that the elections can be manipulated. We know that this debate can have political connotations of certain political parties, but in Brazil, this didn't exist. In Brazil, it's of national pride to have developed this technology and overcome. What did they overcome? Well, Giuseppe told us in those pictures, those centers of Yaparaçao, which was so complex, and Brazilians with their great sense of humor said that elections in Brazil were an act of faith because they knew how people voted, but they didn't know what they were counting. And this machine eliminated that middleman, and it offered certainty to the electoral process. So there we can see what I was talking about. We want to resolve an issue with this technology. For example, we know that Brazil is huge. Their electoral list is very large. So this possibility of being able to send the votes of the machines to the national center, and it's done so quickly, because before in Brazil, it would take weeks to get the electoral results. Now let's see Venezuela. Here we can see something where, first of all, you have a political sector that doesn't believe in it, then they do believe in it, then they don't believe in it. You can see that technology itself can have different degrees of acceptance depending on the political context. Manuel allowed me to go over 5 minutes, so I know I'm out of time. But I truly think that it's very important to share that in the case of Venezuela, this image is a touchscreen machine. And what you do is you choose your preferences using the touch screen. And as you can see, you can also have a little board attached. When there are too many electoral authorities, you go to that little board, and that allows you to use the same screen, but you can see the image enlarged. So it's a compact machine. However, like I was saying, the opposition in Venezuela did not believe in these machines until the legislature won. And then they did trust the machines, but then they lost confidence in the machines when Smartmatic denounced outside of Venezuela that some kind of messages were shared there that could alter the results. And after that, if you ask the people of Venezuela that do not like the government in power, will say that they want to get rid of all these machines. And these are the same machines that they trusted before. Paraguay is a very interesting case. This was the Brazilian machine translated to Spanish. And Brazil was very generous because they loaned the machines, the engineers, they helped them develop their systems, etc. And in 2006, Paraguay was using 55% of their votes through these machines. But in 2006, 2007, there is an option that is a candidate that's not El Colorado. As we know, there has been a dominance of a political party lately. So this created susceptibility among the citizens. And they said, since this political party has been in power for so long within a context of the Colorado political party, I think we should go back to physical ballots. So they discarded all this system that Brazil had loaned them. And for many elections, they went to physical votes. And then they're using a Salta device. The Salta device is like mixed. It's not like an autonomous e-voting system, but people use a little ballot, a physical ballot. They introduce it into the machine, and that machine stores the information on their machine. So as you can see, people don't feel like they have to use a machine. They use a paper, a piece of paper, and the ballots are counted, and these represent the results. Here we have a prototype of Peru. What I don't like about this Peruvian system is that it's difficult to be audited. This machine prints out the result, and what they do in the audit is that they like scan the papers to get the same results of the machine. And the truth is that that's not truly auditing, because you're like comparing the results of the machine with the results of the machine. So you would have to have some other type of auditing, like in the case of Venezuela. In Venezuela, they had to audit, so they would audit 51%. Can you imagine this? They opened up 51% of the machines and they compared what the printout said with the machines. That's what the opposition demanded, to trust these machines, but now they don't trust it in any way. Here we can see some of the developments in Mexico. It's quite user-friendly. I got to see it in a fair that took place in Mexico. Well, very quickly, because I could talk about this forever. I do not have the example of the Dominican Republic intentionally. The Dominican Republic developed a vote that they call automated vote, because electronic vote generates susceptibility in that country. If you ask me during our Q&A session, I would love to tell you what happened in the Dominican Republic. What I can tell you is that they went back to manual voting. And here we can see the aspects that we must consider regarding e-voting. Cost. Many people say it's a huge investment, but it's an initial investment that allows you to reduce other costs. Data, safety, the nature of the voting and counting. Some people trust these machines completely. And others say, as long as an IT engineer can change the program, I will not trust those machines. Limitations regarding the regulatory framework. Well, we have been designed for manual voting. So when they set up e-voting, you have to go back to the regulatory framework. Brazil has done a great job in this, but there are countries who have inserted e-voting without changing the legislation. So there are serious issues, because sometimes they say that everybody will have to sign the minutes. And if there is no way of doing this, well, obviously you have an issue, a legal issue. And the debate here has to do with the need and convenience of adopting a certain type of technology. And it has worked in some contexts and others it hasn't. And some interesting questions that I share with you are these. Will EV voting will be more attractive to have higher participation? E-voting in all its modalities reduces time in delivering results, but can this damage the guarantees of the electoral process? It's like a voter in Nicaragua told me once. She had been in the line for 90 minutes in the blaring sun in Managua, and the voting process was taking forever. And I asked her, wouldn't you prefer to have an e-voting system so you could vote faster? And she said, no, I want complete security in my vote. If it has to take 10 hours, I will be standing here for 10 hours. I don't want to rush and have a lack of confidence in the way the votes are being stored. And what is the responsibility if there is a technological failure? And we know that this happens. I have stories, not all of them related to e-voting. Some of them have to do with sharing the results, but they are documented with cases in Ecuador and the Dominican Republic, etc. And there we have seen technological failures, and this has compromised the work of the electoral body. And I'm going to just mention this because I can't elaborate on it. And Carla also mentioned about it has to do with the ruling of the Electoral Court of Germany. And what it says is that if the citizens cannot know exactly where their vote is in each one of the stages, e-voting is not constitutional in Germany. So until they resolve that issue, which is a little difficult to resolve, and it has to do with electronic voting safety. And obviously, not each person can see each stage of each vote. This is very interesting. I would recommend you read up on this for those who are in favor or against, because it's a very interesting ruling because of what they request. And finally, we have these elements that I just shared with you. I apologize, I've gone over time. And this has to do with what we have to take into account when we implement or extend e-voting. So what is the need that we are working on? What is the priority of this regarding other electoral systems? Cost benefit ratio? What is the benefit for the citizens? And the systems that have been successful because they educated the population on what was going to be used and how it was going to be used. And through political consensus. Political consensus is something that obviously is very important. I have an example of a person of the Philippines, but I will save that for the Q&A session. And finally, we have the fact that we have to be gradual. And this has allowed for e-voting to take place in certain countries. And it's the only way we can have confidence amongst citizens and not something that is contrary for the electoral bodies. I apologize for going over time, but as you were able to see, I had a lot to share and I was only able to insinuate on some of them. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your intervention and regarding this overview of how the different ways of e-voting that have been implemented in Latin America have worked. So we have many questions, and I think that we will have time to answer these questions in the Q&A session, but we can see that it has a lot to do with the context and the situation of the country to see which electronic instrument is the best to be used for voting or just to automate certain stages of the electoral processes. Thank you very much.
And next, we have Dr. Ninfa Hernandez, to whom I want to thank for accepting this invitation. The floor is yours, Dr. Hernandez. Good morning. Thanks a lot. I cordially greet my colleagues here in this panel and everybody joining us on the INE streaming channels, and especially Dr. And Councillor Humphrey, who invited me to this forum, and in particular Marisol Vasquez and Fernando Diaz. The topic I am sharing today has with aspects to consider for the implementation of e-voting in Mexico. And I also believe that e-voting is useful, and we need to talk about different modalities. And I would like to refer to the proposal made by Marina Zapula, which is my starting point. She referred to e-voting as a transformation of traditional voting forms that can involve all the electoral process for only some phases related to voting with e-voting machines on election day. This takes us to do different e-voting conceptions. One is broad, one is narrow. The broad definition involves the use of technology in the development of the electoral process as a whole, either for the electoral roll or the preparation of electoral rolls, the registration of candidacies, the exercise of vote as such, and the counting of votes and transmission of results, which we have discussed, which is important to automate the electoral process or the participation process as a whole. While the narrow definition or the minimum definition involves the implementation of the technological resources in the issuance of votes and the counting of votes exclusively, it also refers to a single denomination of the automation of suffrage. Both stages are part of this e-voting modality, and therefore, in this particular case of my proposal today here, I am considering that in order to define these e-voting modalities, we need to take into account three aspects precisely. The first aspect that to consider is that we have to rely on a minimum definition to identify these e-voting modalities. with including the voting process and the counting of votes. The second aspect to consider is that these modalities must be considered based on experiences in their implementation in different parts of the world. And the third aspect to consider is that these modalities also depend on the way in which technology evolves. I'll talk about this throughout my presentation, even though some of these aspects have already been mentioned. I want to be that repetitive. But in general, there is coincidence in terms of how to categorize e-voting, which one of them is in-person electronic voting, and the other is remote e-voting. In the first case, you vote in a polling station, and in the second case, you can vote from wherever voters are. For purposes of the pandemic, and precisely talking about what Dr. Thompson said, obviously, when it comes to the pandemic, e-voting, remote e-voting could have been very useful because it takes place through the use of computers, cell phones, tablets, digital television sets that have a connection to the internet. And it will suffice for voters to enter their voter ID and number to access the system. The in-person e-voting system involves the use of electronic machines in controlled environments where you necessarily have electoral officers that in theory support this process in both cases. And here I want to insist, because this is something I already heard in previous presentations. I should say that you need accredit your identity by voters. And well, in 2010, Julio Telles Valdez and Rodolfo Romero Flores precisely published a book on e-voting, and they pointed to these two modalities. But they made reference to in-person e-voting through the use of e-voting machines. If you compare this with what was proposed 5 years earlier by Marta Cantijos in 2005, a professor of the political science school of the Barcelona University, she pointed to both modalities of e-voting, but in particular, she identified three processes for in-person e-voting, and not necessarily as e-voting to the use of e-voting machines pointed out by Romero. These three forms were also mentioned by Dr. Thompson. She talked about punch card voting systems, which you see in the image. This was the initial system with optical readers, which through the use of a card that was inserted into a device, and that card was also inserted into a voting ballot box. And then you have a voting system through the use of reading device, through the use of pens and paper, and finally, the voting system through direct recording systems or devices which are automatic, including electronic ballot boxes through the use of a touch screen and or a screen and a keyboard. What I want to mention here is that this first system and the second system are no longer useful. They are becoming obsolete, which is also part of the evolution of technology, which is something already addressed, which we must take into account, because in effect, today, talking about in-person e-voting refers precisely to electronic ballot boxes. But Ines Dula at the time identified two modalities, even though this has been mentioned already here. Those that have a voting registration system in the devices memory through the use of a keyboard, touch buttons, or touch screens, and those systems that have a voting registration system through a magnetic band card using a computer with a touch screen, an optical pen, or a laser pointer. Obviously, the difference between both, which she identified at the time, even though we have a larger variety of e-voting machines, had to do with the registration of the vote in the system. The advantage of some e-voting machine systems or models is that voters can correct their vote before the vote is cast definitively. Some of them allow you to vote blank with blank ballots, and some others will issue a voting receipt or voucher, which means that you can have the certainty that the vote is recorded correctly. In the latter case, this is precisely what has led many people to think that this voting modality is safe or more secure than remote voting, among other things, because these machines inside their system have an identity logic to identify voters and their votes. Some people said that remote e-voting didn't allow for the identification of voters, which made many consider it was not a viable option because it didn't guarantee the principle of one voter, one vote. But through or as a result of the evolution of technology and the incorporation of democratic processes and technology processes, they have incorporated the use of a blockchain or some other systems. I would like to talk about the case of West Virginia in the US, where they developed blockchain-based technology that provides encrypting services through the use of blockchains. This application was designed at the time by a company in particular known as Votes, and that allowed for the identity of voters to be confirmed through a biometric matching. Um, Something similar applies to the most recent experiences of e-voting in Mexico City. In the case of consultations for participatory budgets and community participation elections in 2020 and 2022, they also used an internet voting system, which is a system designed by the Mexico City Electoral Institute to gather votes through remote processes several years ago, with the aim of increasing security levels through this modality and give certainty to voters in the sense that they wouldn't be subject to identity theft. The Mexico City electoral system implemented in the registration and registration stages for voters in this consultation biometric mechanisms. How does it work? Through the use of artificial intelligence. And its functionality is very similar to the example in West Virginia, which compares the photo on the voter ID versus the person behind the screen. I mean, you have an application that can be downloaded to your app or your personal computer, precisely through their internet web page, and through facial recognition systems. Including traits of some traits, physical traits that never change, like those around the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. Once that recognition is completed and once the identity of a person is confirmed, they are giving or they were giving a code. If even though this stage was previous to the biometric process, it opens up a possibility of ensuring or guaranteeing the principle of one voter, one vote, which contributes to building trust in e-voting. This precisely talks also about a broader definition of e-voting, as I mentioned earlier. And well, these are particular examples of how fast technology evolves and its application in political and electoral processes. And we're adapting to this change. This evolution also makes it possible to think about improvements or enhancements in technological tools to guarantee security through the use of e-voting, which allows us to mitigate these problems that are inherent in e-voting systems. Even though the two modalities of e-voting have been used both in pilot tests and binding exercises, including exercises that have had variable results in both modalities. I do believe that there are three elements that in particular must be covered by e-voting systems in its remote modality, because that's one of the things that have been questioned as explained in this panel. Number one, it should be seen as reliable for the voting of citizens. The second aspect of requirement is that remote systems should not exclude anybody due to the lack of access to this technology, so that we can reduce or eliminate, if possible, to the extent possible, the digital gap or the technological gap in the places where it is implemented. And finally, another requirement is that once remote systems are implemented, people want to continue to use it, so that we can make a transition from a pilot test to a binding processes, so that these systems are not discarded after an initial investment, and they become more reliable among citizens. However, I would like to emphasize that in both modalities, voting, I mean, the results of their use or its use have been so varied that any of these modalities should take into account a series of requirements for its appropriate use both in electoral processes and citizens' participation processes. In that regard, I would like to refer to international standards that institutions like IFES, IDEA International, the Venice Commission have proposed to generate successful experiences and promote through these experiences the use of these systems so that we can define a series of minimum elements to take into account that these standards refer that they should include aspects such as or cover aspects such as universal access with a minimum level of equal opportunity to access this technology, and also the possibility of participation of persons with disabilities, which is one of the elements that has been beneficial or one of the advantages of the use of e-voting. Security is also an important aspect. Security elements should exist to prevent access from third parties so that the system also can resist attacks, vulnerability attacks. It should, these systems should also be auditable by institutions that do not have a conflict of interest in terms of the election in question and the organization of elections. They should be reliable. And also, another requirement is that e-voting should only be used for those functions for which it was created. Secrecy, so that there is traceability of voters, including the data of voters, and authenticity, which is that only registered voters should be able to vote, and nobody should vote unless they are registered. And simulations, including tests for efficacy. And so that in case also of system errors, they can be detected and corrected prior to elections. One of the advantages of e-voting that it has is that it has made elections more efficient and effective when it comes out to their management and organization. And it has the levels of political participation in places like Brazil and India. In both countries, they use precisely e-voting machines, in-person e-voting machines, and therefore they have become examples internationally of fully automated electoral processes that are also successful. In both cases, the introduction of e-voting was gradual, and they have modified their e-voting machines to update them based on technological advances, but also to perfect them and strengthen their security features. For example, as mentioned by Giuseppe Dutra, um, precisely in Brazil, for example, they had incorporated the feature of printing the actual votes, and they added everything related to biometric data. In India, they also added a braille system to facilitate the voting of people with visual impairments. And another advantage of e-voting in some cases is that it has improved the levels of political participation thanks to its gradual implementation, with the example of Estonia being the main one, which is a country where all citizens can vote over the internet. In this country, e-voting was used for the first time in municipal elections in 2005, and uh, with an initial level of 2% all the way to 30% in 2015, 32% in 2017, and 44% in 2019. Whereas in elections last year, in local elections in 2021, the figure increased to 49%. These examples show that there are many advantages in the use of both modalities of voting, with a series of benefits, either as a result of technological structure or improving conditions for voting with more effective processes for counting of votes. However, this has also involved the well-planned implementation with simulations so that if the automation of voting fails or the applicable conditions are not the best, they have a backup system. Sometimes bad decisions are made by electoral authorities. One example precisely is a case that was not successful in Germany, which has been mentioned here, where there was not an appropriate verification process for the system used. In that case, for example, they never uh, uh, confirmed or tested errors in e-voting machines, which and also there was not a possibility for citizens to learn how their votes were being counted or processed, which led to a major issue, and the resolution that you already mentioned was made. Another aspect to highlight is that no matter how evolved technological tools are, they may have technical failures that, if not corrected timely, can be disastrous for elections, like in Iowa in the US in 2022, where for the opening of primary elections, people had to wait more than 24 hours to learn about the results due to software failures. The problem was attributed to the fact that the shadow, the company supplying the system, had developed the system only 5 months prior to the election. They didn't have any time to test their application. So the problem was that even though votes were recorded correctly, the results were not only partial or not consistent. Another case that Dr. Thompson didn't mention was that of the Dominican Republic. Again, these are only a few examples. When in February 2020, they used this e-voting system for the first time in municipal elections. And the technical failure was that not all the political parties and candidacies appeared in voting machines, in-person voting machines. After an audit conducted by the OAS, the conclusion was that the problem was the bad management of the Electoral Central Board, which was in charge of organizing elections, because the software had bugs. So there was a failure in the tool for the detection and prevention of failures, and there was not a good quality protocol to remedy and address problems in devices. So it became evident that failures were reported in e-voting one day before the election. I mean, they didn't do the right simulations, and therefore there were failures on election day. I want to conclude my participation here by mentioning that even though there are characteristics inherent in voting that may have been questioned upon its implementation, like security and the storage of voter and the authenticity or of voters, there are strategies to attenuate or mitigate these problems, as long as there is good planning and good management and support during the implementation of the system. For example, these alternatives include, for example, tests sufficient and necessary, simulations and verification of or verifiability of e-voting systems and devices, contracting external audits, right infrastructure, backup devices and machines, among many other things. I mean, if e-voting fails because precisely that it can compromise the implementation of principles of voting, the reason may be bad decisions by the electoral institution or organization in charge of organizing and managing elections, as well as the process of incorporation of e-voting, which must be gradual. It shouldn't take place or occur overnight. It's exactly the opposite. What we find is that successful cases of e-voting are those that were gradual in their incorporation and that involved an error and trial process, precisely testing the financial capacities and the technological capacities of the systems, sought progressively to build that trust among citizens and political actors in technological tools. So I always say that e-voting is only a tool, but if a democratic systems fail, I mean, tools or electronic tools can facilitate processes such as democratic process, but if democratic processes themselves fail or electoral institutions fail, we cannot expect technology to solve these problems. And that's basically the end of my participation. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dr. Hernandez. The truth is that you gave us a great overview of the different modalities of internet voting or e-voting, the use of blockchain, in-person, remote blockchain processes, will also be a topic of discussion in this series of sessions. And thank you for sharing information like that of the case of West Virginia. And I found that these international standards are also interesting in terms of the requirements to guarantee or that must be ensured to make a progress when it comes to e-voting systems. And I believe that we agree on that because I also believe that the process must be gradual. Next, let me share a few questions that we have received on the chat. Let me read the questions. I could do this into segments so that you have time to answer questions in the same order that you presented. First, we have a question. To begin with, we have a question. Felix Gonzalez is asking a question. Do you believe that e-voting could be implemented, um, but also generating a trust and certainty among citizens? And Enrique Rojas asks, how can you make sure that citizens' votes are not tampered with? Sofia Lopez asks, do you believe that internet voting could increase citizens' participation in elections and in civic participation exercises? Enrique Rojas, what about the cost of e-voting machines and internet voting? We have a series of other questions, but I don't know if you would like to start with these ones. I would like to mention also that people in the audience have asked if these presentations will be made available. And the answer is yes, they will be made available on our micro site. So you will have access to these presentations by our experts. So let's give the floor to Dr. Dutra to answer these questions if you have answers. The questions are, can you repeat the questions, please? Yes. For you in particular, can you mention the name of or the title of your book again? But the questions are, do you believe that in Mexico it is possible to implement e-voting so that we can generate trust and certainty among citizens? And our question is, how can you make sure that votes are not tampered with? Number three, do you believe that internet voting could increase citizens' participation in elections as well as in civic participation exercises? And another by Enrique Rojas, which I believe is important because we're always involved in this debate around costs. He asked, what about the cost of e-voting machines and internet voting? On e-voting machines compared to internet voting, and also compared to traditional voting. I mean, is traditional voting much more expensive compared to other electronic voting systems? I'll try to answer the questions. First of all, I believe that trust is the basis for everything in this process. And to implement the change from traditional to a digital electronic process, you need to go through different stages like we did in Brazil. I mean, our process began back in 1985. And in effect, it was a major change only until 1996, almost 10 years after the first initiative was launched. But there was a lot of long-term planning, a lot of dedication, and also a lot of involvement, mainly with the participation of several government institutions like the three branches of government, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative powers. Because there was an urgent need for a change in terms of modifying the electoral process, which didn't have a lot of credibility. So to achieve this, we had to rely on systems and strategies to build trust in electronic voting system. And for that, you need to be able to define all the different processes, and you need to involve all the different stakeholders from the state, as well as citizens who should contribute to the success of these stages, making sure that these stages are participatory and have a capacity to increase trust in each of them. I mean, you cannot start a reliable digital system if you have a reliable voter role. You cannot have an effective voting process without elements and functionalities to guarantee the proper verification and auditing of the voting process with the participation or involvement of ordinary citizens. And also, you need to engage in systematic evolution processes with security mechanisms, as well as transparency and accountability or auditing mechanisms. All these elements must be part of a larger implementation long-term plan, of course, with the effective participation of all citizens, including state institutions. How can we make sure that in the case of e-voting, votes are effectively counted and recorded? Well, there are several mechanisms to verify voting processes. Idea, I mean, I have already assured some of them where voters have a possibility of making sure that their vote is being effectively counted. In the case of Brazil, voters can make sure that their vote is counted with secrecy. Otherwise, the process can be breached. So we need to implement a very reliable process. And for that, you need security and auditing mechanisms with respect of constitutional provisions, in the sense that votes must be secret. The implementation of these processes is complicated, but you also need to implement mechanisms to verify the identity of voters, so that they can rest assured that their votes are being counted and counting towards results.
So here we know that if we have this type of voting, we were experimenting twice in Brazil, and this type of mechanism is not always just another verification mechanism. To the contrary, here it was like a cause of all the historical issues with Brazil of frauds, meaning the participation of physical hands. Because if you use a paper to vote, no matter how many mechanisms you have to verify counting, you can materialize the information. And we can see that these are mechanisms of frauds that are quite simple without the need of overthinking it too much. All you need is just a little skill to add or subtract a vote, so that would offer inconsistency. we saw that there was more fraud than the digital options. In digital options, those who verify these mechanisms, like through encryptions, traceability, and there are other mechanisms to protect the information. So if they turn it into paper, you would eliminate all the safety measures that you have. And so that's how we see it. After the introduction of digital votes in Brazil, it was much more ample. And there is a lot of participation of the citizens in the process. We worked with, for example, illiterate people, blind people, or deaf people. We included them in all of this process because now we included electronic mechanisms that is much more easier to use. And it allowed for these people to participate and interact in a democratic process that before excluded them. And so now this technology makes it easier for these people to be able to effectively interact in a democratic electoral process. Now, regarding the cost, well, the cost is much lower than the cost of the logistics of traditional voting, of ballots, of transporting the ballots, of setting up the stations, etc. There are many costs that are reduced in a digital process and much more effective with guarantees than with conventional processes. Like, for example, in Brazil, we have 150 million voters. Imagine having to store 150 million paper ballots. So how can you first protect this information? I mean, because you have to protect all the ballots until they are taken to a storage center. So they have to have protection in all points. We're talking about 450,000 polling stations. And when you protect it with it digitally, all the information is channeled to specific protected points that allow us to store, verify the information and data through requirements of technology. So the digital election cost is much lower. It's much more efficient. So that is my conclusion. Thank you very much for your answers, Dr. Thompson. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. All the questions are quite interesting because I think that we could just spend the rest of the day answering these questions because each one of these questions could take up a whole day of reflection. I'm going to try to summarize. If I seem superficial, it has to do to time restraints. And in another occasion, I can elaborate on it. Now, is e-voting viable in Mexico? Well, it's just like Giuseppe was saying. The best electoral system is that system that will offer confidence to its citizens. If it's e-voting or traditional voting, we have to use the system that will allow for the chain of credibility be completely legitimate. So imagine, for example, I have a country that has not experienced any type of innovation in its electoral system, which is Uruguay. Uruguay has a system of citizen recognition that is quite particular. Uruguay has the highest level of confidence in Latin America, and they have not used any type of technology for their voting process. And believe it or not, they are changing them for other ballot boxes, but they used to use metal ballot boxes to store the votes. It's quite fascinating. What am I trying to say with this? That it's not necessarily a modality of voting, but it has to be the one that the citizens accept the most. And that will contribute to an electoral process that is considered legitimate. In Latin America, we focus on lack of trust. Interpersonal trust is the lowest in Latin America compared to the rest of the world, including Africa. And we have very low trust in our institutions. So we have a lot of work to do if we want to modify the structure of our electoral processes. For example, in Mexico, in some states, even with very interesting technological developments, but when these states have to vote for reoccurring or national votes, the national votes have to take place manually because it hasn't been introduced nationally. So once again, we see the coexistence of e-voting for local authorities, but manually for national elections. So that is evidence that it's not easy. So how do you get the confidence of your citizens? Well, it has to do with a gradual process, with drills, and it also has to do with people understanding the machines, that they can see the machines, use the machines, that they be set up in malls, parks, so that people can become familiar with these machines. And all the places where it has been successful, it's where they have done this. So that way it's a process of creating confidence. Now, there are some political conditions that can break down this confidence. Of course, you have the case of Paraguay and Venezuela, where a political context or a situation that generates hesitation and doubts regarding the use of these machines. So no longer people trust these machines, at least a high percentage of the people do not trust them. So now Paraguay had to change their voting system. Why is there a lack of confidence? And now I'm answering the second question. How can you guarantee that votes are not altered? This is something that I say that those who believe in electronic ballots believe in it 100%. And those that don't believe in it are going to have that image of the IT engineer that can just manipulate it to their convenience, and they will change the votes of one political party to another one. And those who do not trust this, or those people that say, couldn't they do that the morning before the elections and modify the systems? We will never, ever convince these people. And they are open enemies to e-voting. And just like Giuseppe was saying, that you have to explain each detail of safety that has been added to the people. And you can gain more supporters this way. But the truth is that it's difficult to convince people that don't trust. And we have the case of Venezuela. They had machines they believed in, then they didn't, then they did, then they didn't. And it's the same machine. Does e-voting allow for further participation? Well, I'm going to focus on our region because these are the elections that we have observed and documented. In the region, we cannot compare the levels of participation. We have countries where voting is mandatory and others where they should. Obviously, where it's mandatory, it's going to be higher. And participation is lower in those countries where voting is optional. Obviously, in South America, it's mandatory. The great majority of Mesoamerica, including the Caribbean, it's optional. So it's difficult to compare the levels of participation. Now, where we have had changes of manual voting to e-voting in recent cases, we have seen, empirically speaking, that participation has to do with how attractive the results of that electoral process is. And it's not so much the use of technology. So if we talk about a context in which people trust the results, they know that the elections are tight and that each vote is important, people will go out to vote. It doesn't matter if it's manual or electronic. However, if they do not trust the system, if they think it's worthless to vote, like in the latest elections in Venezuela, the participation didn't even reach 30%. So I think it's based more on other factors and not so much on technology. Now, internet voting, of course, I think we would have higher participation because we would save so many resources. But the issue is, and I am from Costa Rica, we have some hackers that are just amazing. They, for example, broke into our tax ministry, and our ministry can't even tell you if a taxpayer is up to date with their taxes. So imagine if they could do this with the tax ministry, they can do it in any other area. People dedicate their lives to hacking, and that's why internet is a risk. And that's why banks create all these safety measures for our transactions. And that's why they say that some things should not be done on internet because of the vulnerability of internet. And that is a topic that has hindered going forward with internet voting. And finally, cost. This is relative. Just like Giuseppe was saying, there are some things that are reduced in costs with e-voting, but there are other types of technology that are more expensive. For example, the machine of Venezuela is very expensive, and each machine makes the process more expensive. And it's not true that it's a one-time investment and that you buy your machines and you're ready to go. No, I don't know how many generations there are in Brazil, but the machines mutate and there is a coexistence of different generations. It's the same case in Venezuela. So we talk about storage costs, updating costs, software refining or updating. I have visited the warehouses of Brazil and Venezuela, and the warehouses are impressive. Because imagine, these machines have to be protected, they have to be checked, and they have to be in ideal conditions to preserve technology. And it's quite impressive. For example, they have an exact record of the last time a machine was updated, when they need the next update. And you can see each and every machine where it is, where it's located. And it's quite fascinating. So with no doubt, what it represents a substantial cost saving is internet voting, because you don't have to generate technology. What we do have to offer is safety. Of course, you wouldn't have to set up polling stations. You can vote from your home, or if you're on vacation, or if you're abroad. But like I was saying, it's the most vulnerable vote until we can find a way of it not being so vulnerable. Until then, internet voting will be a hope. But until we can resolve this issue, it will always represent a risk to the integrity of elections. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Hernandez. It's your turn. I will be very quick because many things have already been mentioned. I agree with what Mr. Thompson is talking about in the certainty of e-voting. With no doubt, if a voter does not trust a traditional system, they probably will not trust an e-vote. It depends on how it's generated with these situations of creating confidence in electoral systems. In my point of view, I think it is possible to have e-voting in Mexico. In recent years, INE has been experimenting, having pilot programs for e-voting. And I think they are quite viable, and it's a path that talks about the graduality to incorporate these types of technologies. I am referring to the pilot programs of the binding activities of Coahuila and Hidalgo. And they did not question the viability of machines. They used the electronic machines of INE of Coahuila, and I can't remember if it was also in San Luis Potosí, but yes, we did see confidence there because there was an acceptance of the results. And despite there were some issues with a couple ballots in Coahuila and Jalisco, the results were not questioned. So this tells us about how we build on confidence in electronic systems. This is not the only example. We also have the example of the e-votes in the elections of our nationals abroad, with the CBAY, which is internet voting, which INE developed for voting abroad. And there they combine many elements. It has to do with our context of the pandemic, for example. And it allows us to see how pertinent it is when it becomes necessary because of an emergency. And here it has to do with the health emergency. And with these results, we saw that they were not only used in entities where you can do internet voting for nationals abroad, but also it was used in the recall election. So we can see of two cases where we are gradually using more and more technology, and the results were not questioned. And here we can see that we are building confidence in this mechanism. So yes, I think that if we go back to these examples and that if we continue following this logic, I think we can talk about automation, nationally speaking, on behalf of Mexicans in Mexico doing electronic voting. But of course, this is gradual and we have to build on it, and we have to use technology, and we also have to assess the financial aspects of introducing electronic voting. What modalities are going to be used? Do we have the infrastructure and everything that I was talking about in my presentation? How can we guarantee that it has been altered? The fact that we have tests of voting machines as well as electronic voting is an element that is undeniable. They shouldn't be vulnerated. And this has to do with tests being performed so you can guarantee this. and that these tests be done more frequently. Obviously, drills would contribute to generating this confidence and offering certainty in voting systems. We can increase the participation, just like Mr. Thompson said. This participation has to do not so much with the technology, but also that the elections are attractive, or the mechanism of participation, or if it's optional or mandatory voting. But what is a fact, and it has been researched by the MIT, is that if citizens use a resource more and more, they tend to use it more. So what happens in Estonia with e-voting is that it's something that shows that argument that yes, with no doubt, they began with a lower percentage, but it has grown as technology is used more and more. And this happens in any type of voting, in paper ballots or ballots. We see that if we use it more and more, and if there is not something going against the results, well, what we can see is that we will continue using it. That's why it's important to gradually build this confidence to generate results in participation. And finally, when we talk about costs, of course, we see that e-voting sometimes can be more expensive because of the purchasing of machines, because you have to update software and you have to buy new technology. And like I mentioned in my presentation, technology also evolves, and it's not just a one-time purchase, and you can't just use the same system forever. You always have to update the use of technology. We have to consider storage. But yes, in the long term, it does offer a fundamental cost saving. For example, we also have a large electoral list. So with no doubt in the long term, it would be viable to consider e-voting regarding costs. Of course, you have to consider other factors that we have also talked about. That's how I conclude. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I still have questions. Do you want to answer the questions, or do we close the conversation now because we have gone over time? Dutra, can you please share the name of your book? And I will very quickly ask the questions, and maybe you can give a short conclusion. How does biometric verification take place for the implementation of e-voting? Would you guarantee audits to ensure that the system is reliable? You can confirm the participation and identification of citizens, and we can use this round to make your final conclusions to close this first table on e-voting in Mexico. Dutra, the floor is yours. My book is on Amazon, and it's only in Portuguese. And it talks about my experience in electoral institutions. And I also talk about e-voting, and I share my experience. And professionally speaking, it's very meaningful for me, and that's why I wrote this book. When we talk about biometric identification, it's a process that we began in 2008. Where we verify biometric data that includes fingerprints and a face photograph that are used to authenticate a voter at the time of voting. And what the voter does is that they have to share their fingerprints, and the software verifies the fingerprint and compares the fingerprint to the database that is part of the electronic ballot. And if it coincides, they open up the machine for voting. This is a process that is implemented since 2008. And today we have an electoral list of more than 120 million citizens with biometric data, and there's an individualization process that also guarantees that you have this unique biologic characteristic of this person. And I think there was another question. What was it? It has to do with the registry of candidates. Yes, we also have another process that we follow. There's like a previous process that includes various stages. And it goes through a series of conditions to be able to participate in the elections. And when we go to the e-ballot, they have already gone through a previous process where we have prepared the voters. There's a preparation of the political parties as well as the softwares that are loaded into the machine. And then this process selects certain types of files, and then these are loaded in the presence of representatives of political parties, attorneys, DAs, etc. And in this process, they verify the authority. They verify all the information that is being uploaded. And the candidates also participate in the process. And then once we go to electronic ballot, we do the verification of all the software, of all the data, all the photographs for their integrity and to make sure that they are that person. It's a process that has been developed throughout a period of many years. And it includes various elements of verification that are available to all the people and all the voters.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Dutra. Dr. Thompson. Very briefly, because I want to take more time than the time we have allocated. When it comes to biometric identification, you have e-voting systems with the incorporation of biometric systems. You have manual voting processes with incorporation of biometric systems, or you have voting without any form of biometric identification. They don't have to be combined necessarily. But you can design e-voting machines that include biometric identification component. I say this because in many of the countries these biometric processes are separate. In Venezuela, for example, they call it capta huellas, but in the case of these devices, we have found that they are more prone to failures compared to electronic ballot boxes. I just came from another country where there was a manual process combined with biometric features. The problem is you need a plan B, because oftentimes either the machine gets stuck and it will take time before they get another one to replace it. You cannot stop the voting process. And you also have fingerprinting devices that often fail or are not that easy to read. So that means that you need to have an authority that allows the process of voting to continue in case devices have failed. So what is the main element required for biometric processes? A solid, well-developed electoral roll with the biometric characteristics. We're making progress in the case of fingerprinting systems and facial recognition software components, but they are not infallible, which means that we always need to have a plan B in case something fails. In any event, as I mentioned earlier, you always have the need to have contingency plans because technology fails. Even the best technology can fail. So if an electronic machine doesn't work, you need to have a possibility of implementing a manual process or replacing it as soon as possible. And let me wrap up with a comment that reflects the importance of credibility and trust. In the case of India, they use electronic devices, but the country is so huge that elections, at least the ones I discussed with the head of the Electoral Commission of India, are not taking place simultaneously. I mean, they take place distributed in among 4 consecutive Sundays, which means that the e-voting machine team goes to a given state, then they go to a different place the next Sunday, etc. Is that possible in Latin America? No. Among the proposals made during the pandemic was the proposal of having a 2-day voting exercise so that we could reduce contact between people. Chile actually suggested it as an option, considering especially the number of elections they have in place or upcoming, but the political class said no, because there was not the certainty as to what could happen with the votes between the first and the second day of voting. So again, the best electoral system is that generates trust. It's not a problem in India because you have separate voting days, Sundays, but in Latin America, that's not highly feasible. Not in Latin America. And let me conclude with a reflection. And figures help us. The good thing is that in Latin America, we held a large number of elections during the pandemic, and there was not a peak of infection in these countries as a result of these electoral processes, which clearly shows that you can organize these exercises that are vital to democracies without jeopardizing public health. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Dr. Hernandez, please. Yes, thanks a lot. Again, just to wrap up, I would like to say that the biometric identification processes and everything you said about the blockchain is now becoming a trend. And that's how technology is evolving and the direction in which it is moving, which makes us think about the possibility of a biometric identification for voting systems or for e-voting machines. So obviously, when you incorporate these systems, like in Mexico City, that was done with the purpose of guaranteing the principle of one voter, one vote. And that's precisely the purpose of this kind of elections, so that this principle is not violated by identifying the voter through this e-voting system implemented. But of course, it is also necessary to have up-to-date technology. The same applies to candidacies, for example, so that you can see the names of the candidates and their photos in e-voting machines. Of course, that is subject to the design of e-voting machines and the design of ballot, and that will determine the possibility of showing photos or more information about candidacies. Of course, this requires good electoral management by corresponding electoral bodies. And I particularly would like to conclude by saying the following. Um, that even though e-voting can be an alternative in a country like ours, you need to take into account that these processes or systems should be combined with the possibility of incorporating e-voting, but preserving the possibility also of manual voting. Because when you move away completely from manual voting, you can raise suspicious. So yes, I believe that it can be incorporated, but also it should always be combined with the alternative of traditional voting on paper. And once you see that results improve in terms of incorporation of e-voting, you can make decisions to determine the evolution of their incorporation or not. But the point is that we should move away completely for traditional voting via ballots. That's my reflection. Thanks a lot, and I'm glad to have been here together with my colleagues and council members. There is another question for me. You were a counselor at the Mexico Institute. Do you have the experience required for a national project? When I joined in that electoral institute in 2006, 16 years ago, e-voting was already implemented, and Pioneer Institute in these processes was the Mexico City Electoral Institute. So these achievements mentioned do not necessarily match the evolution of the federal process, but that's something that we need to address as a country. I want to thank you for your participation. I know that we took more time than expected, but there were many questions. The panel was interesting, and I really want to thank the three of you, Mr. Dr. Janine, Dr. Thompson, and Dr. Hernandez. Thank you for your participation. If you allow us, we will share a certificate of participation by email with you. And we truly hope to have you back to talk about other topics. And also, I want to thank all the participants from INE who helped us in this transmission or broadcast, especially the coordinator of international affairs. Even though the name appearing there is Rafael Riva Palacio, your name is Manuel Carrillo Poblano. Thank you, Manuel, to you and your team. And of course, thanks to everybody joining us on the different platforms and social media channels of INE. We'll see you tomorrow so that we can continue with the sessions of this forum with session 2, which is that of e-voting and IT security. Thanks to the participants and the experts. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Joseph. Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Thanks, Joseph.
Muchas gracias. Muy
Muchas
bueno.
gracias.
Vamos a traducir tu libro, ¿eh?
Oh, sí, sí, importante.
Mi esposa